We're going to continue on with selling real property and talk about marketable title. Property is considered to be unmarketable, or title is considered to be unmarketable if, one, the seller's property interest is less than the one that they purport to sell. Two, the seller's title is subject to an encumbrance. Or three, there is reasonable doubt as to either one or two. So for number one, what do we mean by the seller's property interest is less than the one that she purports to sell? Well, if the seller only has a life estate, but she is trying to sell a fee simple, then the title is unmarketable. Right? She is trying to sell a property interest, a fee simple, which is greater than the property interest that she has, which is a life estate. The seller title is subject to an encumbrance. What's an encumbrance? An encumbrance is a condition or impediment that is on the property. It can be a lien on the property for money or a mortgage. It could also be a restriction on the type of land and the type of use of the land. I don't want you to have to worry about what all encumbrances all at this precise moment. We're going to go over them later. If you do get a question on your exam, it will say that it is an encumbrance, so you will know. So this next case that we're going to discuss, Lohmeyer v. Bauer, is an action that resulted because a buyer and seller entered into a contract to purchase or to sell Lohmeyer, but the buyer discovered that there were title problems before closing, and they sought to rescind their contract. The facts of the case are as follows. Lohmeyer entered into a contract to purchase a home from Bowers. The contract provided that Bowers would convey, quote, good merchantable title, free of and clear of all encumbrances, subject, however, to all restrictions and easements of record. Well, before closing on the property, Lohmeyer discovered that the house was located within 18 inches of the north boundary line of the lot, which violated the city's ordinance that required what's called a setback. Almost every city or ordinance has a setback amount, which requires that if a house is built on property, it must be set back a certain number of feet from the street. That's what a setback is. The second thing that Lohmeyer discovered was that there was a private restriction on the property, and that private restriction said that only two-story homes could be built on the residential lots. So when Lohmeyer found this out, they sued to rescind the contract, and they argued that the title was unmarketable. Bowers then countersued for a specific performance. So the trial court found for Bowers, but the Kansas Supreme Court reversed and found for Lohmeyer, and we're going to discuss why. All right, so the basis of marketable title is that the parties can negotiate to include an express condition in the contract about whether or not the property is marketable. Absent a provision, then the default rule is applied because there is kind of an implied condition of marketable title. In this case, it is the default rule that applies. Right. We previously defined lacking marketable title as when one of three conditions occurs, right? They don't own the estate that they're purporting to sell, right? Two, the title is subject to an encumbrance, or 3, there's reasonable doubt as to either 1 or 2. What do you think the problem was in Lohmeyer? Well, the problem was that there was an encumbrance on the property. 2 encumbrances, actually. The first encumbrance was a public encumbrance. It was something that could be found in property records if you did a record search. And the other encumbrance was a private encumbrance, meaning that it was not something that was filed with the county clerk's office or the records office. I'm taking these a little bit out of order, but let's talk about the public encumbrance first. So the court said that if there's a public encumbrance, then if there is a violation of that encumbrance, the title is not unmarketable. Let me rephrase it. A violation of a building or housing code does not render the title unmarketable. So here, because the city ordinance required that no building would be erected without the 3-foot setback, and the house was located only 18 inches from the line, that did not make the title unmarketable, according to the court. Now, for the private encumbrance, the majority rule is that when there is a private restriction, that restriction is an encumbrance that can make the title unmarketable. Should there be a difference between private and public encumbrances in determining whether title is marketable? What justifications could possibly exist to support finding private encumbrances to make a title unmarketable? Well, the reason that there is a difference, a legal difference at least, is because if the mere existence of a public restriction made land unmarketable, then pretty much all land would be unmarketable because most property has some type of public restriction on it. Almost every parcel of land is subject to local ordinances, zoning requirements, land use regulations. But it is difficult to sometimes determine if there's a private encumbrance, such as a mortgage, a deed, a judgment lien. And so public encumbrances are pretty easy to locate. It's a lot harder to locate the private encumbrances. So that is one of the primary reasons why courts treat the two differently. All right, let's do some marketable title hypotheticals. And I want you to tell me if the title is marketable in the situations below. So S has title to only 25 of the 40 acres he agreed to sell to B. Is title marketable? The answer is no. S agreed to sell 40 acres, but if he only has access to 25 acres, or title, sorry, not access, if he only has title to 25 acres, then he is selling less of an interest than he owns. So the title is not marketable. Next question. After signing the contract, B learns that property is worth less than the purchase price because it's located in a flood zone. Is the title marketable? Yes, it is. Because public encumbrances, like zoning restrictions or other physical conditions, they do not make a property unmarketable, even if they do lower the property value. All right. Next. Before signing the contract, B sees electric lines crossing part of the land. After signing, B learns that the local electric company has an easement across the property for these lines. Is the title marketable? The answer here is maybe. It depends on the jurisdiction. Because B saw the electrical lines crossing the property, B might have been put on notice of the easement. And in some states, if the property is encumbered by a visible encumbrance, or if the buyer actually knows about the encumbrance, then the court will presume that the buyer impliedly agreed, right, to accepting this title burden. And that perhaps the buyer already negotiated into the purchase price the fact that these encumbrances existed. But other jurisdictions don't require these exceptions. And if an encumbrance exists, then the title would be unmarketable. All right, hypothetical 4. S claims title to the land by adverse possession. P, the original owner, brings a quiet title action against S. S tells B, don't worry about it. There's no chance I'll lose this case. Go ahead and close the deal. Is there a marketable title? A court here would probably find that there is not marketable title. Because remember, marketable title is title that is free from reasonable doubt. And S's assurance that to not worry about it is not going to be enough to make the title marketable. In a lot of jurisdictions, the fact that a lawsuit exists in and of itself against the property is enough to cause a cloud of uncertainty around the title and would make it unmarketable.